Hey, this is Joe. For one more time, pardon the mess. We're actually putting together some cabinets. This studio is over my garage, and I've got the sloped ceiling thing going on. It's a big space, but there's no storage. There's not a single, cabinet, closet, nothing. There's the attic, which isn't super helpful. So all my stuff has kind of just been strewn about for the last couple of years, but we're going to kind of consolidate and put a bunch of it into 4 of these cabinets that we are in the process of putting together, but it's not done yet because they take forever, because that's life. But today I want to talk about something new: dynamic EQ. Now, it's new to me. It might not be new to you. If you're a dynamic EQ expert, this video probably isn't for you. If you don't know what it is, or you know what it is, but you're not super sure how it fits into your workflow, I want to talk about that. So I have been almost since the beginning of Home Studio Corner, which I started in 2009, so years ago. I, for whatever reason, have a very simple approach to what plugins and software I use. I started off my journey using Pro Tools, switched to Logic for a few years, and then eventually landed here in Studio One. And for whatever reason, I have just not bought plugins. When I worked at Sweetwater, one of the perks at the time, it may still be true, all the plugin companies would give us as salespeople all their plugins because they wanted us to use them, and then we would sell them to our customers. So I think I actually still have, if I go look in my iLock account, I think I still actually, let's look. Yeah, look at this. So these are all plugins that I got, and these are just the ones that I signed up for as a Sweetwater employee all those years ago. And as you can see, some of them never expire. This one might not have been from Sweetwater. The Slate Digital, I want to say maybe they gave that to me when I was a part of Dueling Mixes. But anyway, as you can see, lots of things here. Most of them have expired. I thought less had expired. But anyway, you get the idea. So for whatever reason, so when I had all these plugins, I was excited, right? I was a kid, and so I installed all of them. And whenever I would work on music, or I would go to a buddy's house who also had all the plugins, we'd work on a mix or something like that. And I remember very specifically, he said, "Oh, let me put an EQ on this." And he goes to the EQ folder in his plugin folder to add an EQ, and it literally filled up the screen with just list after list of EQ options. I mean, it was either EQs or compressors, probably both. Like dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of options. And as soon as that window pops up, you're like, okay, now we have to make more decisions. Like, making music is, at its core, a decision-making process. What note do I play? What note do I sing? What lyric do I use? And you do that a bajillion times, and if you ask enough questions and answer them, you end up with a finished album, right? So there's already a million questions we got to answer. Why would we add a million plugin choices to give ourselves even more choices and more decisions to make? It gets exhausting at some point. At first, it's super exciting, and then it gets exhausting. So I'm not anti-plugin. I just, for whatever reason, especially since I started using Studio One, I kind of just, not even intentionally, decided I'm just going to use the plugins included with the software. And that has been the case. I own 2 third-party plugins. One is Easy Drummer that I bought specifically for a video and haven't used since. The other is FabFilter's Pro L2 limiter, because I like that for mastering. I think it's a little bit better and more precise than the one that comes with Studio One. So, but otherwise, for EQs, compressors, I use the Studio One stock stuff. Now, I am a Sphere member, of course, so I get all the extra different compressors and EQs, but it's not hundreds, it's maybe a dozen or so. So it's a manageable list of things, and I really have the 3 or 4 that are my go-to, and that's what I use. And it's been this way for years. Now, it probably comes from a place of laziness. I just don't. Imagine with me, I have so many of my customers and students who will email me and be like, "Oh, I haven't made music in 2 months because I switched computers and I'm having a hard time getting everything installed and all my plugins won't transfer, blah, 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 blah." Because they have dozens and dozens of plugins, third-party plugins, they've got to go find all the installers for those on the new machine. They've got to figure out how to register them. Oh, this one's expired. Oh, this one's not compatible. And they literally play this game, especially for people who don't have endless amount of time to work on this. If you're just working on this a few hours a week, or a few hours a day when you come home from work, you don't. It makes sense that it would take you a couple of months to change systems because you've got all these plugins you've got to install. And it's funny. I'll ask them like, "Do you use all these plugins?" And like, "Well, I bought them." That's not the question. Are you using them? And I'll usually say, "Why don't you just not install them for a second? Just install the main software and just make some music." What if this might sound crazy? What if you just made some music? And people are like, "Oh, wait, I can do that?" Yeah. So for me, it's always been less of a focus on which plugins I'm using and more of a focus on, man, what music am I going to make today? And the Studio One stock plugins sound great and work great. So that's what I've used. And I've had friends say, "Oh, you're missing out. You need to get the UAD plugins. You need to get the Slate plugins, all those things." I'm sure they're wonderful. I'm sure you can make an argument that they're better than what I have, but I'm over here making music and I'm happy with the music I'm making. That's kind of the perfect situation, right? And that's what I want for you. All that as a terribly long preamble. Cue the comments of, "This guy talks too much." Studio One version 6 that recently launched, one of the updates, and it's kind of a sleeper update, is the addition of dynamic EQ. So Pro EQ is the stock. Let me show you. This is the I'm going to show you on this one, is the stock EQ inside of Studio One, okay? Normal EQ. With version 6, we've added the ability to create dynamic EQ, which is where each band of the EQ, you can set up the shape of the EQ curve, but it doesn't trigger anything until the signal in that frequency range crosses a threshold. So it's similar to a multi-band compressor, except that you can really dial it in and make it like a notch, like you see here on the screen, or a big wide shelf, or there's really any number of things you can do with it. So I want to talk about specifically, since I'm fairly new to this, so I mixed the latest Stare Down EP, which, by the way, if you haven't checked that out, I've got a band. It's Tim Horsley and Joel Blazaire. We've made music. They've played on all my stuff just about, but we finally came together as a band and wrote an EP together and recorded it. Go search for Stare Down on your favorite music app and look for The Feet. There's a couple bands called Stare Down, we found out, but look for The Feet. That's the album cover. And this is one of the songs here that I've got pulled up in front of me. But this is the first full project that I use the dynamic EQ for mixing and mastering. And while I'm sure my opinions will change the more I use them, it's a pretty handy tool. It's one of those things people have been telling me for years, get the FabFilter EQ, whatever it's called. It's got dynamic EQ. It's fantastic. It'll change your life. And I've said, cool, I'm happy with what I've got here. And I believe I've even done a video on why I think I can get by without dynamic EQ. And mainly that was because I didn't want to buy another plugin. And it's not because I'm cheap. Honestly, I could probably get the plugins for free because I have this YouTube channel. I get those offers all the time too. I like using what I use. And when I switch to a new system, I just install Studio One and I've got all my plugins. It's a pretty sweet deal for me. However, now that being that I'm just using what's in Studio One, now that it has dynamic EQ, I've decided to give it a shot and to try it out. And it's pretty interesting. So I want to show you what I love. One of the things I love about Studio One is the EQ shows up here in the main mixer view. So I can see the EQ curve. In fact, I can even see what the dynamic EQ is doing. Check it out. So what's the right way to think about dynamic EQ? As you could see here, there was the room mics had something jumping around. I think the overheads or this kind of bus had some stuff jumping around, and the snare had some stuff jumping around. Here's what that snare track looks like again. So you can see I'm using a combination of notch filters because there was a bunch of ringing on this snare, and also this particular band of dynamic EQ that's only turning it down when that frequency becomes a problem. So the way I think about it, if I've got something in a track that is just consistently a problem across the entire track, like ringing in a snare drum, for example, here's what that snare sounds like, the raw track by itself. Boom, and then way up high. There were some frequencies there that just ring every time. It's not some notes, it's every time he hits it, they ring. So what I do is I go in and I find those frequencies using just a regular EQ. I boost like this, really narrow to find the frequency. and then I say, okay, you're coming down. And normally I just do it with one frequency. This one, it needed multiples because there was kind of like harmonics of each. So here are the other two. So I brought those two down, and it just gives it a more natural sound. I like the ringing of a snare drum, generally speaking. For this song, it was becoming the loudest thing in the mix, ironically. I could hear the ring over everything, so that was too much. So I pulled those down. Now the snare sounds like this. Still has character, still sounds cool. But then over here on this low band, there's another frequency. Kind of a ooh, ooh, ooh. And it was one of those things like that particular resonance, the ooh, comes out more on single snare hits than it does on like a bada 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 bada. Does that make sense? So it changes depending on what he's playing. When it's a single hit and it has time to kind of, the sound has time to build and swell and blossom and then decay, that ringing woo was coming out a little too much in the mix. I like the volume of the entire snare for everything else, but that particular woo was too much. So it sounds like Joey from Joey Lawrence, whoa. But so I needed that when it was this slow halftime section, like this bridge, I wanted that not to be too woo-woo-y. And so the dynamic EQ pulls it down when that happens. The other times, if it's not a problem, it doesn't pull it down. Dynamic EQ is great across lots of things for mastering, but I thought this was a cool example of how the difference between dynamic and regular EQ on the snare drum. And then here's one on the room mic. So this room mic, I just slapped it up on so we recorded in this room. Drums were over here. The room mic I put way over there, just up against the ceiling, just to have something. And it doesn't sound particularly great by itself. Although I like having room mics so I can create some sort of a space without needing a reverb plugin. But here's what the raw room mic track sounded like. Okay, it sounds great on sections like this. So he's playing toms, snare, kick, and it's got this roominess to it, this woodiness to it, like the whole ceiling of these wood panels captured a lot of that sound, and it's cool. But when you get to like the bigger choruses, once he starts playing the cymbals take over completely. Like, there's that frequency that's kind of cutting through. I don't know if it's a resonant frequency in the room or whatever, but I found that the cymbals was too much. Cymbals were too much. The cymbal sound was too much during the parts where he's playing the cymbals. But during this section, I really liked the space that I was getting. I didn't want to lose that, then the drums become too dry. So my solution was to do this. Check it out. So this is almost like using a de-esser on the room mic. First thing I have is a notch here that's taking care of that consistent ringing that was there. So I'm pulling that down. But then I'm using this kind of high shelf to just turn down the highs when it becomes too much, which means it's probably a little too aggressive in this section. But we're getting some sound of the room. But then for the latter sections, when he's wailing away on the cymbals, those cymbals get cut pretty dramatically. So to compare, let me turn it off and you'll hear how much of the cymbals it is cutting out for me. Now, could you accomplish the same thing by just rolling off the high end with regular EQ? Similar, probably. The problem is in these other sections where I don't, like in, let's go like back to verse 1. I don't want it to be rolled off as much. I want to get some of those high frequencies in there. So you can see it's cutting some of the highs here, but not nearly as much as it was during the chorus when the cymbals were going nuts. It's cutting like 18 decibels there when there's big cymbals, but during like a verse, it's only like maybe 6 to 10 decibels of gain reduction. So it's a difference, right? That's like twice as much. So those are some specific examples of where I've been using dynamic EQ. And you can hear the difference here. Let me play the drums for you. I'm going to turn this EQ off, let you hear it without it, and then I'll turn it on. You can hear how it really did make a difference to the overall drum mix. So it just keeps, it's a fairly subtle thing. The more prominent thing is just that static notch that's taking that ring out. But then there is a little element of the extra washiness of the cymbals doesn't take over like it was before, especially in the full mix.
Break it down on the breakaway. Always the last to go.
Well, there you go. Thanks so much. I know this was a longer video. I talked a lot, but this is complicated stuff, and I want to make sure that the thing that I want more for you as a subscriber of this channel is not to give you a quick tip that you can just go copy somewhere else, because that will only apply maybe once in your life. I'd rather help you think about how you approach this, think about how you use these tools, think about which tools make sense for you, so then you can go attack any number of problems using those same principles. So that takes longer to do than a quick 1-minute video, but I think it's much more impactful in the long run. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do. If you like stuff like this, I've been doing a weekly video since 2009, so there's plenty of stuff here for you. I also have a 5-step mixing guide that outlines my 5-step process for getting a mix. You can have that for free. Just go to 5stepmix.com. Thanks for watching. See ya.